Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine.
Well, it's great to see you again, Fabrice, and it's great to be doing another podcast with you. I've kind of missed it, to tell you the truth. I think it's been about 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, of course, our listeners won't know because they're being delivered at about 1 week intervals, but it's been a couple of weeks since we saw each other.
Yeah, and so I always enjoy this a great deal. And I just wanted to mention today we're going to be having an introduction to empathy, how to communicate with other people to develop more loving and satisfying relationships. But before we get into it, I just want to mention that we've got tons of neat topics coming up soon on our podcast series.
Yeah, you keep coming up with ideas, and we have to decide what we're going to do next. So.
Yeah, exactly. But one, we got a great email question from somebody on how do I help someone who's depressed or anxious.
Yeah.
A lot of people have family members or friends who are obviously feeling down in the dumps and unhappy, and the way most people go around about trying to help someone actually sometimes makes the situation worse or doesn't help. So we'll have a
fix-it mentality.
Yeah, so we'll have a really good, hopefully, podcast on that topic soon. Also, we're going to have one on perfectionism.
Yeah.
I once wrote an article for Psychology Today called "The Perfectionist Script for Self-Defeat," and it's how do you distinguish the healthy pursuit of excellence from compulsive perfectionism that causes you to fail and to end up with anxiety and depression. And I think that perfectionism is one of the most common themes we see in people who are depressed and anxious. I'm not good enough, and what if I fail? So we'll have a really powerful podcast or two on that topic as well.
That's a tricky one because, people don't want to lower their standards, of course.
Exactly. In fact, all of the topics are tricky. Today's is going to be the trickiest of all because we're going to talk about some communication techniques that you can use to heal troubled relationships with anyone. And we're going to make it sound really easy, how to use what we call the 5 secrets of effective communication. But it's actually extremely subtle, and it's easy to screw up when you try to use them. But why don't you set the stage for us?
I can vouch for that because the way that we do empathy in team is using the 5 secrets of effective communication, and when you look at them, they look really simple.
Yeah,
and in fact, they are simple. If you were able to follow them, but they're simple but not easy.
That's right.
And one thing that you and I were talking about earlier is that we tend to be fairly good at it after a while using those with our patients. And then we encounter some difficult situations in our own lives, and then it all falls apart.
Absolutely.
Because then we become much more involved and much more triggered.
Yep.
So it's a practice.
So where should we begin on this phenomenally important topic? The whole world is in conflict with right now, and on the verge of chaos and war and interpersonal anger and divorce and let me say how I got into the 5 secrets, because I've been treating a seminar at Stanford for the psychiatric residents. And I'm seeing them making a lot of the same mistakes when they interact with difficult patients that I made when I was a psychiatric resident. And how I got into this therapeutic empathy and trying to learn it and develop techniques for training people in it was kind of based on my personal experiences. And I hope I don't repeat myself with a story from a previous podcast. But early in my career, when I started getting into cognitive therapy and psychotherapy and away from full-time, pushing,
with Aaron Beck,
pushing pills, with Aaron Beck, I was awfully excited about cognitive therapy, and he had developed some techniques for changing negative thinking patterns and helping people pop out of depression, and then I developed many, many more techniques. And in the early days, I used to think that if I had enough techniques, I could help any patient. And so I had a lot of very difficult patients referred to me, and they would come in and say, "Oh, you can't help me, and I'm a hopeless case." And I kept thinking, I've got to get more and more techniques so I can prove this patient that they can recover. And
give the right medicine.
Or the right technique, or right pill, or whatever. But some of them, many of them, really were kind of just intensely resistant. And no matter what I did, they kept being this kind of power struggle going on. And I had an experience that was kind of shifted the direction of my career quite a bit early on. I got a call one day from Aaron Beck, Tim Beck, we called him, and he said, "David, I'm in trouble here and I need your help." He said, "I gave a talk at the Maudsley in England a couple of months ago on cognitive therapy," which of course was new at the time. It was like some fantastic new, radically different thing that no one had heard about. And he said there was this medical student named Sterling Morey, and he asked if for his residency, not his residency, but his clerkship, as medical students, they rotate through different specialties. So if he could come to Philadelphia from London and spend a month at my Center for Cognitive Therapy, which was brand new at the time, by the way. Yeah. And he was up on the 5th floor of the Girard Bank building, and I had my private practice on the 3rd floor, an office on the 3rd floor. And he said, "Well, I told him, sure, come on over," and then I forgot all about it. And he just arrived today for his month of training, and I don't have anything to offer him. We don't have a training program. But I told him that he could come down to the 3rd floor and sit in on your sessions for a month and watch you doing therapy, and that would be good training for him.
Were you pissed off?
Yeah, I was. And I was thinking, my gosh, patients are paying me. At the time, I charged $45 an hour, which seemed to me like a highway robbery.
Yeah, back then,
And I said, my patients don't want some medical student watching, like they're some kind of a rat in an experiment that somebody's studying. But at the same time, I didn't want to let down a colleague, because I had learned a lot from Dr. Beck, and I was trying to support his efforts too. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, I'm not sure my patients are going to like that, but maybe he could come down and sit in on 1 or 2 sessions, and then if the patients object, I can't offer more than that, but at least, that would give him something to do today.
Yeah.
And Beck said, that sounds perfect. He'll be down your office in 1 minute. So, it was just, he got on the elevator and he walked into my office, and he was very nervous and he seemed insecure. And he told me that he'd had no psychology classes in college and no psychiatric training yet in medical school, so he didn't know anything.
And you're wondering what a mistake I've just made.
Yeah, and he's practically trembling. He's so nervous. And he said he wanted to sit in the corner so he wouldn't have to say anything, because he didn't want the patients to find out how inept he was. Yeah. And I said, well, Sterling, that sounds abnormal to me, but we can sit in a circle, kind of like in a living room. I have 3 nice, padded type chairs, and that'll be more comfortable for the patient. But don't worry, I'll carry the ball, and I won't put you on the spot or anything like that. So he reluctantly agreed to that. Well, the next patient who was coming, just to disguise things a little bit, let's say he was a student at Drexel University, and he had paranoid schizophrenia, which is a sad and tragic kind of disorder, and he had been writing death on his dormitory door and screaming in the middle of the night, and the authorities, the school were very concerned and sent him, to get some treatment. Yeah. And I was pretty stuck with the guy, and so I said to him, "Would you mind that this is we'll call him Robert?" And I said, "This is Sterling Moore. He's a medical student from London. He's here to study for a month. Would you mind if he sits in on our session today?" And the patient, who I'm calling Robert, said, "Oh, that's fantastic." And he got excited because he thought that Sterling was a special messenger from London.
Came all the way to
just
to
help
visit
out
him.
with his therapy. And
Yeah.
he made that interpretation. So we go in and we sit down, and the session begins, and the patient starts pounding on the desk. I won't do it because it'll sound wrong on the recording. It'll rattle the microphone. But pounding on the desk and kind of shouting at me, Dr. Burns, I saw John the Baptist on the way to today's session. And he was in the Episcopal Church. And I walked past the church, and the door was open, and there was John the Baptist. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Oh, this is a special invitation for me. That's why the door is open. They want me to go up and interact with John the Baptist." So I went in and I knelt on the floor next to John the Baptist, and he began to tell me about the secrets about the spiritual future of the human race and how I was to deliver these messages to all the peoples on the earth. But he said, "But then the minister saw us, and the minister got jealous, and the minister called the police, and the police evicted me. And there's a conspiracy to prevent me from seeing John the Baptist, and I want you to know what you're going to do about it, Dr. Burns." And I'm feeling very defensive and anxious and not knowing what to do. And I'm thinking in my mind, I know you're not taking your Thorazine, which was one of the neuroleptic,
back then,
antipsychotic drugs, and I'm going to have to raise the dose. I'm thinking of his psychiatric medications. But this is how the sessions have been going. I wasn't getting anywhere with this guy. And so I turned to Sterling, and I said, "Tell me, Sterling, what would be the British approach?" and Sterling looked terrified, like a deer caught in the headlights at night. And he just froze and didn't say anything, and his eyeballs started spinning in their sockets. And Robert leaned forward, like the silence made it sound like Sterling was going to say something very important, like, "What's this great genius from London going to say?" And after about 15 or 20 seconds, Sterling leaned forward and he said, "Well, Robert, in England we have a great interest in religion. And I actually took 2 religion courses in college. And if John the Baptist has a special message about the spiritual future of the human race,
I want to know.
I would like to know what it is. What did he tell you?" And Robert says, "You really want to know?" And Sterling says, "Absolutely, I'm fascinated. Tell me what John the Baptist told you." And so they got in this very intense conversation, and I was completely excluded from the session for about 20 or 25 minutes. And the fellow, Robert, started to get more and more relaxed and started more and more rational. And then he I heard him say to Sterling, well, Dr. Moore, he started calling him doctor now, even though he's just a medical student. You've helped me so much with that problem that I had about John the Baptist." And I'm thinking, he did? How did he do that? What's going on here? And do you think you could help me with another problem? And Sterling says, "Oh yes, I can help you with any problem." and so what's your problem? And the fellow said, "Oh, I'm horny all the time." And Sterling said, "Well, why is that a problem for you?" And he said, "Well, you see, I don't know how to talk to girls. And I don't even know how to talk to boys, to guys. In fact, I don't have a single friend in the world, because everywhere I go, I notice what's different about me and other people, and I can hear them talking about me, and they're saying, 'Oh, that guy's crazy. He has schizophrenia,' and then they broadcast my sexual thoughts on loudspeakers, so that all the students can hear my private sexual fantasies, and it just, I feel like I don't fit in anywhere." And Sterling said, well, I noticed that about you right away. And Robert says, "Well, what did you notice about me?" And Sterling said, well, that you are in a way very different from other people. And I bet everywhere you go, you notice what's different between you and the other people. And then Robert says, that's exactly right. How did you figure that out? And I'm thinking, well, you just told him, dummy. He's just repeating back what you said. And then Sterling said, and I bet I think I know something else about you too. Robert said, well, what's that? And Robert says, I bet you don't notice what you do have in common with other people. Like what you and I have in common is an interest in religion. When we talk about religion, we have a tremendous time. And then Robert said, you're right. I never thought of that before. Where do you think I could find some real horny girls I have something in common with? So then they started talking about that. And at the end of the session, Robert turned to me and says, Dr. Burns, and I had said practically nothing the whole 50 minutes, and he says, Dr. Burns, this is by far the best session we've ever had. Will Professor Morey be here again next week? And he's a professor now. He's been promoted. That's right. And I said, oh, he'll be here for the whole month. So don't worry about that. And then I said to myself, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be the expert and teach this insecure medical student about how to do psychotherapy. And yet he's got something I don't have. And if I could figure out what it is, I could become a way better therapist. I've got a lot to teach him, but I think he's got a lot to teach me. And so I asked Sterling if he would sit in with me on every therapy session for the month. And I was at the time seeing 70 hours of patients per week. And it was just fantastic. And it was one of the best months of my career. That working teamwork approach was amazingly effective, but he could always break through with patients that I was stuck with, and it usually didn't take him more than about 30 to 45 seconds to take a very angry, agitated, critical, mistrusting, paranoid patient and turn them into warmth and tears and trust quickly. And I said,
Did you talk to him about how, what was his view of the patients, what he was, if he was doing anything specific, or whether he was just being himself?
He was just being himself, and so I was kind of spying on him, to tell you the truth. And I would but I was teaching him cognitive therapy, and I might say that was many, many years ago, and then he went back to England and graduated and became a top European therapist and active in the British and European cognitive therapy movements there. And he learned a lot. But what I did, I tried to give names to what he was doing.
Yeah.
Because I said, if I can name it, then maybe I can teach myself how to do that. And that's how I first developed what we call the five secrets of effective communication. And I'll just state what one of them was, and then we can have a dialogue about the other ones. One thing that he did an awful lot, I came to call the disarming technique. Whatever a patient would say, no matter how illogical or preposterous or aggressive or unfair or whatever it was, he always found the truth in it. And that had a tremendous calming effect on people. So when Robert said, I saw John the Baptist, my thought was, no, sir, you did not see John the Baptist. You were hallucinating because you have schizophrenia.
Yeah.
That's a cruel thing to say or to think, but that was what went on in my mind. I was seeing...
But don't you think that you were right?
Exactly. Whereas Sterling was saying, oh, you saw John the Baptist. That's true. The human race is in a spiritual crisis now. And we do need some kind of spiritual guidance. And what did you learn? What did you think? And then he immediately became relaxed. And so I put that right at the top of my list of what I now call the five secrets of effective communication. It's called the disarming technique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's say you have somebody who has really distorted thinking. I mean, obviously a schizophrenic probably does too. But I'm thinking of a more common thing, like somebody who's really, really depressed and is completely hopeless about their situation. I'll never get out of this state. In fact, I can prove it to you. I've been like this for 2 years, and things are really looking bleak. Are you going to agree with them?
Well, you're getting into the fine points really fast.
That's right, yeah.
Without talking about the other 5 techniques. But you can agree with a person in an effective or an ineffective manner. And that's why all of the 5 secrets of effective communication are difficult to learn. But you might agree with the person by saying something like, I can imagine how horrible that must feel to be feeling hopeless. And in fact, you say you've had years of psychiatric treatment. You've taken every known antidepressant, and nothing has worked for you. So when you're saying you feel hopeless, you're showing a courageous willingness to look at the facts that your life has presented to you. And my heart goes out to you, because hopelessness is the worst feeling a human being can have. But we can endure any pain if we think there's an end in sight. But when you feel hopeless, that's when some people begin to turn to suicide.
So, knowing what you just said and knowing how what the underlying structure is, I can see that you've used 3 more secrets.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to say what they are.
Yeah, sure. I might also do a little positive reframing with the patient and say, and as painful as that is, I just want you to know that it's a joy to work with you, and I'm honored to work with you, and I've worked with many, many patients that feel hopeless, and the prognosis is extremely, extremely positive for turning it around and getting back to joy and self-esteem. But right now, I can see you're really suffering, and tell me what that's been like. I really want to hear. Maybe you're also feeling frustrated or angry or anxious or inferior. Tell me more about that. And that would be like feeling empathy and thought empathy. Thought empathy is repeating what the other person said. Feeling empathy is acknowledging the other person's feelings based on what he or she said. Inquiry is asking gentle probing questions to learn more about what the other person is thinking and feeling. So those are the 3 listening techniques. And I organize the secrets into the acronym EAR: empathy, assertiveness, and respect.
Yeah.
And those are the 3 empathy or 3 listening skills. The disarming technique, where you find truth in what the person is saying rather than arguing with them or defending yourself if they're criticizing you. Thought empathy is repeating the other person's words. Like when a person speaks to you, they're kind of sending you a letter. And you want to open that letter and read it back so that they know that you got the message. Feeling empathy is acknowledging the person's feelings. And I have a list of feeling words in different categories. Like there's anger and its synonyms, like pissed off, ticked off, hurt, irritated, resentful. There's anxiety words: anxious, worried, scared, panicky, afraid. There's depression words like sad, down, in the dumps, blue, unhappy, and so forth. And feeling empathy is saying, given what you said, I can imagine you might be feeling A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And then inquiry is tell me more about that. You want to open the other person up.
Yeah.
So they feel safe to express their feelings.
One thing that I do with my patients sometimes is I tell them what would be the first few words of each of those secrets. Would you like to hear what I use with them?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, for example, for the disarming technique, I tell them, well, start with, you're right.
Yeah, that's a good one. ...
And then, thought empathy would be, well, I'm hearing you say that ...
Yeah.
And then feeling empathy would be, I'm imagining that you might feel this.
A, B, and C.
Yeah, A, B, and C.
Those are words from the feeling words chart, right?
The inquiry, just like you said, is tell me more.
Yeah.
It's very open-ended. Yeah. And the stroking would be...
Well, let's go through that. We've done empathy, and then we have assertiveness.
I'm going a little bit too fast here. Sorry.
And assertiveness is sharing your feelings, and the formula there is I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. And those, again, would be feelings from the feelings word chart. Like you might say, I'm feeling anxious right now, or I'm feeling really sad to hear that you've been depressed for so long and feeling hopeless. Then R, or respect, is a tool I used to call stroking, which is to say something warm or caring, to express admiration or respect, even in the heat of battle. Yeah. Now I've renamed that affirmation.
Okay.
Because people don't like the word stroking.
I know.
It took me 15 years to come up with a better name, but actually someone came up with it at a workshop about 2 weeks ago, and that's a good way to put it. So those are the five secrets, and they sound pretty simple, or perhaps not exciting until you get into them. And I think a really good context for bringing them to life is when you're being criticized by someone. And I'll give you another quick example of it here, and then in the next podcast we can go into the errors people make and different ways to use these five secrets. But the disarming technique means to see that what the patient is saying is true. Yeah. And especially when the person is criticizing you. And in team therapy, we always solicit written feedback from the patient at the end of the session. They rate us on empathy. They write down what turned them off and what turned them on. And so when you do this type of therapy, you get a lot more criticism than in traditional therapy, because patients have a mechanism for getting negative feedback to the therapist. And that's when you really need to learn to use the five secrets skillfully, or if you're having a conflict with your spouse, for example. Well, the disarming technique is a powerhouse tool, and it's based on what I call the law of opposites. And the law of opposites is that if you defend yourself from a criticism that sounds untrue and unfair, and by the way, most of the time when we're criticized, we're convinced that the criticism is untrue and unfair. And so if you defend yourself, you'll instantly prove that the criticism was valid. And that's a paradox.
So how does that prove that the criticism is valid?
Well, I'll give you an example of that. But the other side is equally true, that if someone gives you a false criticism that's exaggerated, illogical, or just plain wrong, and you genuinely and instantly agree with it, the other person will immediately change their mind and decide that the criticism wasn't valid. And that's another paradox. Now, I'll give you an example of it that will make it very clear. After Feeling Good came out, I was still pretty young. I just started my practice. I'd been in practice for a few years out of my residency, and I'd written this book, was just starting to catch on a little bit, and a fellow called me from someplace in the South, Alabama or South Carolina. Well, again, I hope I didn't tell this story already on the preview. Oh, well, that's okay. Not the end of the world. And he said he wanted to fly up to Philadelphia on his private plane for 2-hour sessions once a week for treatment, because he said he'd been all over the United States trying to get treatment, and no one had been able to help him. And when he read my book, Feeling Good, he said, "Oh, I see, you're the one who's going to help me." Mm-hmm. Now, I was young, and this went to my head. I was, thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to be real important now. All these, wealthy people are going to fly in and request sessions." And so I was all excited, and so the day arrived, and we had this 2-hour session scheduled, and I went out to the reception area there to shake his hands and say hello. And when he looked at me, he looked like he'd just seen a ghost. He looked incredibly disappointed. And he came in and sat down in the chair in the office, and let's give him a name too. Let's call him Steve. I said, "Steve, you seem real upset right now, or disappointed. Is there some problem?" And he said, when I read your book, I thought you were an elderly man with gray hair. And now I see you, you look like you just got out of your psychiatric residency. You're actually too young to be my doctor. And that really took the wind out of my sails. Here I'm all pumped up, and I'm going to be treating all these famous, wealthy people, and I'm on a kind of a high. And I meet the guy, and within 30 seconds, he's zapped me.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, like so many people do, no, I'm telling myself it's not true that I'm too young to be his doctor. He has bipolar illness. He's on lithium. I used to run the bipolar clinic at the VA hospital. I know all the latest cognitive therapy techniques. No, I'm thinking he's wrong. So I tried to explain this to him, and I said, well, I may be young, but the fact is I have tremendous experience treating bipolar illness. I ran the lithium clinic at the VA hospital. I'm helping to develop the new cognitive therapy. And age, as it turns out, has very little to do with the effectiveness of a psychiatrist. See, so I'm thinking, I'll show him that he's wrong. And so then he responded by saying, well, Dr. Burns, I want you to know that I've been treated by the top people in the United States. I went to so-and-so at the National Institute of Mental Health. He was the chief of the National Institute of Mental Health, but he couldn't help me. Then I went to UCLA, and I was treated by the department chairman at UCLA Medical School, the department chairman of psychiatry, and he couldn't help me. And then I went to Chicago, and I was treated by the top person in Chicago, and he couldn't help me. But at least they had a good bedside manner. You don't even have that. Because, I've been responding defensively. So I said, oh, here's another wrong criticism. And so I said, well, if you had to have surgery, would you rather go to a surgeon with a good bedside manner who's a crappy surgeon, or a surgeon with tremendous skill who doesn't have a particularly good bedside manner? So again, I was trying to prove to him that he was wrong. At that point, he stood up and he walked over to the door of the office and he said, Dr. Burns, I paid $150 or $200 or whatever ahead of time. I gave my check to the secretary for this double session. I've only used up 10 minutes of my time, but I'm going to walk out of here right now, and you're never going to see me again. And you can keep the money. It means nothing to me. I'm a wealthy man. And at that point, I said, I think I'm not doing very well. And I felt like I was being flushed down the toilet. And then I remembered I had a chapter in Feeling Good, how to talk back under the fire of criticism.
Right.
And I wasn't practicing what I was preaching. I wasn't using the disarming technique. You see, I was defending myself, and he became more and more convinced that I was too young.
And before that time, had you been in a situation where somebody was actually criticizing you and used those techniques?
Oh, on many occasions, but sometimes we forget. Well, that's what I wrote about it in Feeling Good, because it's such an amazing, exciting technique. But I was vulnerable because my ego was involved, and that's what makes it harder to use these techniques. But I caught myself, and I said, Steve, could we take it one more time before you walk out the door? Could we? I think I'm screwing up here. Could we take it one more time from the top? And he said. He's still standing by the door, ready to walk out. He says, sure, I've been trying to tell you that you're too young to be my doctor. And then I reminded myself, disarming technique, feeling empathy, inquiry, I feel statements, stroking, that type of thing. So he said, well, Steve, here's the one thing that I want to say to you. When you said I was too young to be your doctor, I can imagine how devastated you were feeling, coming all of this distance, having had all of these failed therapeutic experiences in the hope that this was something new that would help you. And then when you tried to tell me how you were feeling, instead of listening, I argued with you and defended myself. And that's the type of thing that a very amateurish and insecure and immature psychiatrist would say. And so all I want you to know, and I can imagine how angry you're feeling, how disappointed and how hurt you're feeling. And so before you walk out that door, I just want you to take one last message with you. And he says, what's that? I said, just remember that you were right and I was wrong. And when I said that, his jaw dropped open, and he walked back and sunk down in his chair. And he says, Dr. Burns, no shrink has ever talked to me like that before. You're my man. You're the guy I want to work with. And we went ahead and had a tremendous therapeutic experience. But you see, when I had defended myself, as almost everyone listening to this podcast does, every time you get into conflict with your child or your neighbor or your spouse or parent or someone you're angry with, and they criticize you, you defend yourself. That's 90% of what human beings do.
Sure.
And that's what I did, and I proved he was right. When I said I'm not too young, that was very immature. And on contrast, when I finally said, you're right, I am young. I just got out of my residency, and I just responded to you in a very young and inexperienced way, and I feel bad, and you've got every right to be upset. Suddenly he didn't believe it anymore because I was connecting with him in the way that he wanted. So that's just a brief introduction.
I think that's a really good example, and we'll probably need to go over the disarming technique a little bit more, and of course the other secrets. But I think that I really like this story because it really shows how going in the same direction as the person who's supposedly attacking you really helps blend with them and join them.
Yeah, to see the world through their eyes.
Exactly, yeah.
And that involves the death of the self.
This reminds me of, I used to practice the Japanese martial art of Aikido.
Oh, yeah, right. My daughter, too.
And Aikido is like that. It's the way of harmony.
Yeah.
Where you blend with your opponent instead of, fighting them back. So it's a little bit like that.
Exactly.
Well, that was a great podcast. We'll continue in the next one with more of the 5 secrets of effective communication. So thank you so much for today.
Thanks, Fabrice.
All right. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.